Welcome to Manager Tools. Manager Tools Internal Pandemic Response. This cast answers these questions. What has Manager Tools done to address the pandemic? What internal actions has Manager Tools taken? And what can small companies do? If you want answers to these questions and more, keep listening. Here we go.
Folks, I want to recommend, perhaps for the 1,000th time, but in a different time, that you become a licensee if you're not already one. Of course, the podcasts are free. Our mission is to make every manager effective. And most of you know, when you think about it, that the vast majority of the managers in the world can't even afford a book, if that book is even ever made available to them. Our ability to reach those people through our podcast is not inexpensive. And if you've been benefiting from years and years of our podcasts, we would ask you to become a licensee. The benefits are too long to list. My favorite one is that you can download the show notes as a licensee, and you won't have to listen to me, or for that matter, to Mike anymore. You can read the show notes in about 10 minutes as opposed to listen to the cast for 30 or 40 minutes. And we don't think our jokes are that funny anyway.
And we leave them off the podcast, off the show notes. Lucky you.
Exactly. So, folks, consider becoming a licensee. It's $200 a year. We know that things are tight right now, and we ask anyway. Thank you.
So, Mark, we've recommended to folks, we've taken a bunch of actions relative to the COVID pandemic.
Oh, yeah, we have.
And not only COVID-19, but what we think to be probably a recession that's going to occur afterwards. There's a lot small companies can do, large companies can do, and we thought we'd share some of the things we've done here at Manager Tools with you.
Yeah. So, folks, this is a seminal podcast from Manager Tools. We're getting ready to celebrate our 15th anniversary. And I just finished writing this podcast. Our ability to write podcasts in advance has become compressed enormously in this time of COVID-19 or Wuhan flu or whatever you want to call it. And what happened was I was writing a podcast that I never thought I'd write, and that I questioned whether or not Mike would agree to it. Every once in a while, maybe a couple of times a year, Mike, chime in if you think I'm wrong. I've sent you a podcast and say, hey, what do you think? With the idea that I'd like some input, or there's a tone that's wrong or something like that. But I've never ever sent what I sent today was, I've got about half of this thing written, and I'm suddenly wondering whether or not you're going to read it and go, no, we shouldn't put that out.
Right.
And you sent back saying, nope, I agree. I think it's a good idea. And I could have easily brought forward another podcast that I would have had to write next week. But I admit to being thrilled, since it probably took me about 10 hours to write this podcast. We're going to do something we've never done before, and we are going to share with you what we are doing internally to address COVID-19. Many folks mistakenly believe that our guidance, Manager Tools guidance, I get emails about this once a couple of times a month, that our guidance is focused on large corporation.
It drives me crazy every time I hear it.
It's not, guys. It's not. We stand by every piece of our guidance for every size of company, for government, for nonprofits, for academia, any organization, anywhere.
Yeah, unless you're in a company that has no people.
Yeah, exactly. A company of one, even though some of our guidance would apply there. But now we might use a lot of examples that imply a big company. But, if you're a 5-person company, you're still doing race, don't chase. You're still doing one-on-ones. You need to run meetings effectively. You ought to know the HR policies that affect anyway. Okay. But this time we're going to share our experience as an organization dealing with a pandemic. And we're not trying to hold ourselves out as an example. In fact, you'll see we've made mistakes. But it's the first time the world's organizations have ever been where we are right now, we believe, relative to economics and the kind of thing that's going on. You may point to Spanish flu years ago, but the world was a very different place economically 100 years ago. The stat I like to point out to people is in the year 1900, 70% of Americans were in one industry, farming. And by the way, Spanish flu also happened during World War I, which was also made it very different. Regardless, we believe this situation, COVID-19, is unique, and it calls on us to think uniquely. And while we could share with you the timeless principles that caused us to engage in the behaviors we've engaged in the last 2 weeks to ensure our organizational longevity, we want to tell you what we actually did. And we'll mention the principles, but the fact is, we regularly get asked, well, what do you guys do and how do you do it? And so we're going to open the kimono up and tell you what we did and talk about some of our numbers. Now, we don't do this lightly, to tell you the truth. And I don't see, Mike, you chime in if you feel otherwise. I don't see us becoming a role model public open kimono company all the time. I don't think that this changes the idea that we'll start publishing financials online. I don't think that's going to happen. But there's some risk for us. But Mike and I agree, we don't care if it benefits you.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get emails about, well, why'd you do that? That's stupid. Whatever. Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the human race, right?
Yeah. And they could be right.
Yeah. So we've got 4 key points. First of all, we want you to learn the lesson now, right now, when you can do something about it, rather than looking back after the dust has cleared 6 months from now and not having gone through the process for your first time. The second piece of guidance is always start with cash. For many of you, there's no choice. You're already in it. You've been dropped in the grease and you don't have any cash. Okay, fine, but that's one of the lessons. Number 3, cut expenses. And we'll talk about that as open kimono as we can. And the last thing, and it tends to be less true, and so I'll get emails about this as well, that there are 2 ways to survive: have greater revenue or have less costs. So we're going to talk about revenue as well at a high level, because revenue lessons tend to be less transportable across organizations, industries, and so on. But there are still some lessons.
That's great. Our first point, learn the lesson now, not when the dust clears. That resonates with me, dude, quite a bit. Almost always after something, say months later, and you go back and reflect, you forget what you didn't know at the beginning. The experience, the crisis, the challenge that you went through changes your thinking. Much like if you're teaching for 20 years, right? The new freshmen seem incredibly stupid because, of course, they're freshmen. It's their first year in college.
Yeah,
yet you've been teaching that same year for 20 years. Your understanding has grown. And you'll say it much better than I will, but it's incredibly useful to learn the lesson now as you're going through it. Understand what's happening in your mind, such that when you walk out of it, next time you won't have any surprises.
Yeah, look, the adult learning model is learn by doing.
That's right.
The idea that you're going to go through this, not think about it, and then not to try to be as smart as possible through this, and then have a reflective time afterwards to capture your lessons. Holy Toledo, that would be dangerous. All you're doing is increasing the risk of the loss of your organization, which is unacceptable as a professional. Okay, so look, at a high level, guys, almost no one can say ever again that they didn't have, if you're wondering, you didn't have a sense of how the start of a global depression would feel.
Congratulations, you are now smarter and wiser.
Yeah. I'll tell you something. I hear, I heard somebody saying, why would I do what they did? Yeah, they survived the Great Depression. Well, I haven't survived the Great Depression. Well, guess what? There are more governmental tools today. And would appear, I feel confident that this will not be a depression, although it might become, but it will be a very tough recession. I I have some other facts, but the fact that just happened to roll across my screen this morning was something like over 4.5 million people, or I'm sorry, 4.1 or something like that million people in America have already been laid off or filed for unemployment benefits. That's a lot. That's way more than you probably realize. We've been publicizing this, I think, last several podcasts we've mentioned that more hotel workers have been laid off since the start of COVID-19 than were laid off during the entire 2008 recession and 9/11 combined. So the feeling you have, or maybe you don't have it, but you ought to have it, of the coming economic slowdown because of the sheltering in place laws that shuts down virtually all physical commerce, which despite the internet is still a huge part of our economy. The factory's not open, the car dealership's not open, the dress store's not open, the golf course is not open, whatever the case might be. Economic activity matters. It's measured. It leads to GDP, which of course is the metric for what a recession is. So look, if the pandemic virus that we're dealing with now had a measurable 5% fatality rate, which some people were claiming, although now it's coming down. And if you don't know, if you've paid attention to pandemics or just done some research, you'll discover that all initial estimates of pandemic death rates are high, and then they gradually come down for all kinds of reasons. Not difficult reasons to understand, by the way. They're not epidemiological reasons that you can't comprehend. But even if it had a 5% fatality rate, and most of us got infected, and according to the experts, most of us will get infected, we'd lose 350 million human souls worldwide.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah. It would have devastated us for years to come. And I'm not talking about the anguish of loss, but I'm talking about the decline in human ingenuity. All those people are not contributing ideas and work. And really, maybe the bending downward of what seems to me, anyway, from my perspective, to be the only curve we wish not to bend downwards. The arc of civilization and growth that has brought billions of us out of poverty and despair. If you're someone who believes generally that the world is going to hell and so on, I'm really sorry to tell you, you are overreacting to a few anecdotes. The history of mankind is stronger, taller, fitter, older, richer, wiser, safer, smarter. I think the stat I heard a couple of years ago when I was reading Greg Easterbrook and some others was that the poorest person, I'm going to get this wrong. Yes, the poorest person in Bangladesh is living what was 100 years ago a middle-class existence in one century, which is astronomical when you're talking about affecting billions of people. The growth of the middle class that occurred in China in the last 30 years, and Mexico, by the way, and Brazil, by the way, and India, by the way, is perhaps the greatest single happening in mankind in the last 30 years. You could have an argument about that. Most people who pay attention to these kind of things would say it's in the top 5. Now, look, that 5% number, that number was in play a couple of weeks ago. And as I said to somebody the other day, talking about what we were going through, thanks to being able to stand on the shoulders of giants, to quote Isaac Newton, many of the wisest people in the world believe that it was possible that the pandemic would stay at 5%. It scared even crusty old epidemiologist. And what they would have said is, yeah, things are great. We are where we are now, but that giant we're standing on is about to be cut off at the knees, and we're all going to be set back, notably. Okay. Now, argue about that, don't argue about that. I think most people in general, they might not like my histrionics, but there you go. If you accept that position, and by the way, if you're a Malthusian, please stop listening because we disagree with you. We're happy to disagree agreeably, but we think you're crazy. If you accept that position, we have to ask as humans and as professionals, what have we learned? Even in the last couple of weeks. When this happens again, and surely there's not an argument for that, it's not an if, it's a when, right? How are we as families and as workers, as professionals, going to be ready? What can we do now so that the next time this happens, we will be able to weather the storm? Okay. And the point Mike started off with is now is the time to think of these things when the fear is fresh in our minds. 6 months from now, we're going to be feeling differently. Many of our friends, Mike and I talked about this the other day, are already talking about the parties and the hugs they're going to enjoy, perhaps in only a few weeks. We're recording this on Saturday, March 28th. We'll think differently then. But it's a good idea to harness your fear, uncertainty, and doubt right now. World War I, in the beginning, was just a war. And then as things got really bad, it was called the Great War because it was so significantly more deadly than earlier wars. And then finally, at the end, it was called the War to End All Wars. So hellish was it, okay? And that's what people thought. It sounds sarcastic or ironic to say it today, but it didn't feel that way at the time. Until 20 years later. And then it got a new name, World War I, because now we're dealing with World War II, which, by the way, the stories about World War I, if you pay attention to military history or civilian history, and you know that that happened largely in Western Europe, and you pay attention to that, and you say to yourself, wow, that's a bad one. You know, it was terrible. Trench warfare, and many, many millions died, and it was terrible. And you're right, it was. And World War II makes it look like a joke. I mean, you might argue that machine guns and trench lines is a particularly vile and horrible thing, and you're right. But so is firebombing. The numbers speak for themselves. So nobody could have imagined World War II in 1920. Okay, and all of us are going to collectively forget because it's part of our DNA to forget. In 6 months, we will have forgotten how we felt now. So we need to harness that. This is going to happen again. And we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to be ready? And one of the ways we can be ready is to start putting our learning hat on now, today, and taking actions no matter how much later than you wish you would have started, so that we will be learning as we're doing rather than just reflecting or considering what to do differently or writing a playbook after we're already done. It sounds terrible, but the time to write the playbook is as you're playing. It's not easy, but these are important enough times we ought to do it.
Yeah. I was looking at a couple months ago, actually. I was looking at a graph of the stock market over the last 100 years. Mm-hmm. And it is just about a straight line as you can get, even including the Depression, everything else that's happened.
Yep.
Long term, will continue to grow. The world will get better. I have no doubt whatsoever. Over 100 years, it looks like almost a perfectly straight line. But day to day, it's bumpy. Yeah. Folks, that's reality.
There's a sort of a professional Rorschach test that occurs out of that where you ask people to look at that line. Now, I know the graph you're talking about, and it's compressed enough that you can hardly tell that there are fluctuations. But if you make it big enough, you can see all the fluctuations. And you can ask somebody very quickly, what do you see in this graph? And there's a healthy percentage that say, look at it, it's going northeast, right? It's going up and to the right. And then there's another healthy percentage that say, look at all those ups and downs. Oh my gosh. And it's sort of Oh, it's a Rorschach test. One group can't see the other. The group that's going up and down, they have no thinking that, oh yeah, this is safe. In the long run, we're good. And the guys who see the long run are thinking, really? You look at that big picture and the first thing you see is the volatility? You're missing it, man. So anyway, all right. Yeah. So I will say this, folks, one of the things I've learned, I'm older than most of you listening, don't ask the world to change in that bumpy, messy march we're on, okay? Ask what you must do to change yourself and your organization based on the way the world is and is going to be, not the way you want it. If you're listening to this podcast, you're listening to it for free, of course. And some of you have gotten a surprise recently in that my weekly email, Things I Think, which goes out to all of our licensees, many thousands of you, has been sent to everyone in our community. Tens of thousands of managers and professionals all over the world. If you normally get regular emails from us announcing conferences and so on, this past Friday, you got a version of Things I Think. And you will continue getting them every day until the coronavirus passes. This is our way of providing extra value to the community because we think the community needs it. We certainly need it. I think we all need to pull together right now. And it's a reminder as well of the value of a license. If you're not already a licensee, please consider doing so. It's $200 a year, a lot of value.
Okay. So one of the first things, COVID-19, started to get into kind of things we focus on. Cash, dude. Cash is king.
Cash.
How many times have you heard that in your life?
Cash. Yeah, I actually, our youngest son, Drake, I tried to get him. He ended up being named Drake after Sir Francis Drake, but I suggested two names that might
not after a singer. No.
Okay. No.
Just
ask. According to Kate's brothers and sisters, the singer might have been named after him. But
there you go.
The other side of that, though, is the two names that I put in and was trumped on was Rip for Cal Ripken, who finished his streak of 2,164 games or whatever, right? Or he broke the streak of Lou Gehrig right around the time that Drake was born. And that streak started within a week or two of you and I graduating from the academy. I just thought that was interesting. And the other word was cash. I was that was your name. Huh. Yeah, cash. I was overruled. And Drake is pretty cool. So there you go. Look, guys, when it comes to times like this, economically, there's only one answer. Okay? Cash. I'm not saying that economics is the most important lesson we're learning here today about the connectivity of man, about the fragility of our lives, about the pain and suffering of having to say goodbye to a loved one over an iPad because they're isolated or quarantined, okay? But economics is the lesson that we at Manager Tools are addressing ourselves right now, okay? Now, look, perhaps other safeguards will be put in place governmentally in order to protect all of us from ourselves. But remember, whatever safeguards they put in place now for the future, the story always goes, mankind always fights the next war with the tactics of the previous war. And so those tactics aren't going to be well tuned to whatever comes next. So, before the next global recession or depression or even threat or scare that causes people to behave differently out of fear of an unknown future, we must build up our cash reserves as organizations. 1-person company, 20-person company, 500,000-person company. Okay? Academia, nonprofits, doesn't matter, all the same. We must, as organizations, maintain cash reserves that will last for 6 months or a year. And I'm talking cash. I'm not talking access to debt. I'm talking cash. Okay? Now, look, maybe you're not in the hotel business. Look, you might be thinking right now, hey, I'm in a technology company. You could be forgiven for thinking that technology companies would be immune. Okay. But what if a global cyber virus that wipes devices clean? Okay. We've certainly heard of ransomware and all that kind of stuff. But what about a cyber virus? And let's say it's not just Windows, it's also Mac and iOS. Okay. If you couldn't trust that a new computer or phone would be virus free, and so therefore wouldn't be any replacement to the worthless one you now hold in your hands, would you buy another one? No, you wouldn't. And if you stop buying those technology companies, how much cash do they have? And what would that do to those technological companies? They'd go out of business, guys. That's how economics works. What if an industrial accident in a particular geography wiped out that geography where your company gets some or all, or even just the one key part of your raw materials? Okay. Surely, right, your company or we all would adapt, but how long would it take? A year? Can your firm last that long? Could your family make do if you lost your job and couldn't find one for a year? Supply chains have gotten lean, and for good reason. There's benefits to that. But that comes with a broader, sharper risk of disruption, or a broader, sharper impact of a disruption to a leaned out supply chain. As families, let's talk about families. We must enter the next economic crisis with a year's worth of savings. Look, many people I know, including some people who are quite wealthy, might think, their experience is they have no month left over at the end of the money. Or you have no money left over at the end of each month, but who's counting which is which?
Yeah, my son, Alex, who happens to work for the firm, folks, our core IT developer, just yesterday we were talking about this. He said he was looking at his cash reserves and said, so I should have been striving this entire time for 6 months of cash in the bank. And I said, I might have told you that a year ago, dude, but I was wrong.
It's not
It's not enough. 6 months is not enough.
Yeah. And by the way, folks, that puts you in a small minority if you have 6 months or a year. But now is the moment to make us realize all those small choices we weren't willing to make are coming back to haunt us now. Okay. And look, here's the thing. We believe you can get there for all but those of us at the bottom of the economic ladder. This is achievable, 6 months to a year. It's just a question of behavior and choices. I don't mean to diminish that those people at the bottom of the economic ladder are going to struggle. That will probably always be the case. I hope it's a smaller and smaller case over time. And look, go further. You might even think that if you have some money left over, it should be invested so that it can make money to help pay for your retirement, right? I've got some money left over. I'm going to invest, right? But I got to tell you something. I just got a note, Mike, by the way, from my Beast squad leader, Rob Simas, who's a big fan, by the way.
Oh, very cool.
Even guys who do what, and Rob is an investment advisor, even companies who want to invest your money for you so they can make money on investing fees will tell you you should have an emergency fund first. Do that. Okay, get that money together, and then you can start investing. Okay. If you're investing, but you don't have enough savings, and we think a year is about the right amount, there's danger ahead. When the next crisis hits suddenly, and then, you're both good workers, right? But your spouse is laid off. Your income's going to be, let's say, cut in half or 40% or 60%, right? Without savings, your bare necessities, quote unquote, may be more than you can handle. So you may feel forced to draw down your retirement account, which is incredibly painful. Yeah, dude, you say that's not so, but
no, I say it's not good.
It's not good, but no, I mean, it's not good, but it's absolutely what happens to people.
Oh yeah, sure. Absolutely.
And there are penalties associated with that. Well, they'll probably surpass any appreciation you got. But at that point, you know one thing: cash, oxygen, cash.
I was talking to a guy I know, not the folks. I'm not into gambling. As a matter of fact, I don't understand it. Well, I understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I'd rather spend money on time, on energy, on things that the probabilities are in my favor. But regardless, I was asking about kind of his core principles. And the first one he said is, you got to stay in the game. I said, what do you mean by that? He says, I never bet anything more than if I lose it all, I'm still in the game. You got to stay in the game. If you don't have enough cash, you're not in the game anymore. That's when life gets bad.
Yeah, that's a bit like Gordon Gekko in Wall Street saying, got to have enough capital reserves, so you can piss in the tall weeds with the big dogs. You can't, that's why he gave in to Sir Larry, I think it was, when they had their first showdown. That's why when you watch poker on TV and they're all doing these all-in bets, dude, seriously. By the way, if you draw down your retirement account and now you're back to where you started, and if you draw that down and then spend it, now it's 10 years on and you have no cash and no retirement, and you'll never get back the time value of money on that retirement account, which always, it's not the first 10 years that matter. It's the last 10 years that matter when all that money is accruing at much higher levels. The economic world that we live in now has gotten so connected, and so therefore speeding up. That's what connections do. And to our incredible benefit and wealth and standard of living, raising billions out of poverty, that none of us, guys, none of you are professionally immune from being swept out of your role. I'll give you a perfect example. You're probably thinking right now that your CEO is immune. That guy or she is so high level. Actually, a couple of bad quarters that the board had been hinting at were possible, and your CEO kept betting big because she saw the future in this very unique way. She can lose her job. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, they have millions. Well, a lot of them do. And actually, some don't. In fact, more than you realize don't. So, without our roles, if you lose your role, your professional role, you're now risking the source of your family's food, shelter, and clothing. And as a provider, as a mother, a father, or even just a contributing family member, that's unacceptable. And by the way, let's go further. Since we talked about retirement, your wealth, how much you're worth, is unimportant for virtually everybody, all of us, except the very wealthy. It is not what you have in times like these. It is what you can spend that matters because of the nature of our capitalistic system. For companies even, assets aren't enough. Employees can't eat assets. And in very, very difficult times when cash is king, people aren't going to buy your assets unless you sell them to them at fire sale prices. That's part of the end of the lesson in Race Don't Chase. And by the way, to be clear, we're not talking about the intellectual property of your company, the work ethic of your people. That's all stuff that's not marketable. There's no market for that. Okay, it certainly has a bookkeeping entry, but it's not sellable. Okay, so look, I was very dismayed when I read just 3 or 4 days ago that there are major corporations you and I and if you're listening, you've heard of them, that only have 4 days of operating cash available to them.
That's crazy.
As the global pandemic caused governments to suspend large swaths of economic activity, which no one would ever have predicted. No one. I don't care who you're going to have to prove to me in writing that you have a date sometime 5 years ago that there will be a pandemic. You don't have to say pandemic. And we need to prepare for and please don't send me some screed about how the government is going to ruin our lives, but rather about an economic event that caused people to have to stay at home. and what that did and why, you wouldn't have predicted this 20 years ago because the internet didn't exist to keep that from meaning starvation.
An apocalyptic movie that doesn't count as evidence.
Yeah, good point. Exactly right. I'll get these huge MPEG files sent to me over email. I want my email download. And by the way, if you're employed by that company, no matter how fast that company is growing, and you hear companies talk about growth all the time, no matter its value in the marketplace, its shareholder value, total value of all of its shares. You've probably heard recently that Microsoft and Amazon, maybe not Amazon, Microsoft and Apple was the first company to have $1 trillion stock market valuation. Total number of shares outstanding times the price people are willing to pay for those shares. But if you're employed by that company, either its growth or its value in the marketplace, if you have both of those things, but you only have 4 days of cash, we promise you the way that company will address this problem is to cut personnel because they need more cash than they can generate right now if their economic engine is shut down, if their doors are closed. And the single biggest number to go after is personnel. As a general rule, if you don't know it, personnel represent roughly 50% of every company's costs. Some 40, some 60. Please don't write to me and tell me, actually, it's 47%, because that's a distinction without a difference, you high Cs. I love you. The less cash your firm has, the deeper and the faster layoffs will happen. Please, if you work at a publicly traded company, go find out. It's not hard to find out. Publicly available information. And that will affect you. And if we're not affecting you, that will affect you.
Hey, dude, if I didn't want to spend cash because just like we're recommending folks, I have severely limited my cash expenditures today.
Yeah, zero. Yeah.
But this is half a joke, folks. Don't get mad at me. But it's so disappointing that I'm sure within the next month, I'll be able to get a almost brand spanking new Range Rover for, $20,000 or something like that.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's dark. That is dark.
But you know it, dude. You know there are people in your neighborhood driving around Range Rovers, big houses, and they have no cash.
Yeah, they have not.
None.
They've not. Yeah. And if you have cash and you lose your source of income, it doesn't matter. You have cash saved up. You can still pay for that Range Rover, the lease payment or whatever. Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. I mean, what immediately flashed into my mind is I need to go online every day to eBay. Don't laugh at me, guys. And take a sample of 5 Ferrari 328 GTSs that are for sale and see what their prices do over the course of the next 2 months. Same thing, some of you who are listening know that I'm a member of a private golf club here in Monterey Peninsula. I live about 2 miles from Pebble Beach. And for the record, Pebble Beach is not private. It's just a hotel. It's a resort. Now, you can't play Pebble Beach golf links unless you stay at the hotel, and the hotel's very expensive. But be that as it may, when you meet me, particularly if you're a golfer, don't ask me if I'm a member of Pebble Beach. Pebble Beach doesn't have membership. It's just a hotel, like the Ritz. But I'm a member of a private
Days
club.
in my case.
Yeah. There are 2 private clubs here on Monterey Peninsula. There's Cypress Point, which I'll never be invited into, and even if I was invited into, I couldn't afford. And then there's Monterey Peninsula Country Club. And I'm probably the poorest member of Monterey Peninsula Country Club, but the story is we have friends who are on the waiting list to become a member of our private club. And when you get to be a member, when you're finally reached the top of the waiting list, when members either unfortunately pass away or choose to no longer be members, because there's a limit on how many members we can have, then the next person in line gets a chance to become a member and has to write a fairly substantial check, a 6-figure check. And there are people on the waiting list that are secretly delighted. Don't take that the wrong way. They're good people, but they're secretly delighted because in times like this, there will be people who don't have enough cash and they will have to sell their equity stake in the club to generate cash to pay for stuff. So yeah, that's happening. There's no question. There will be fire sale deals. And as we said in Race Don't Chase, what we want is capital, and in personal financial terms, that means cash available at the bottom of the downturn. That's what you want. Because if a Range Rover used to be 50, but now it's 30, and you have cash and you know you're good for the next year, that's exactly the right time to buy that Range Rover. Now, you may also say to me, Mark, that's still a bad choice. You should buy the cheapest, reliable car you can. Yep. Yeah. On the other hand, being careful about your cash doesn't mean you have to take a vow of poverty. You could choose to say, okay, here are the different choices we'll make in the next 6 months to be able to justify what might be a little bit of a splurge, but relatively speaking, a Range Rover at that price is actually a very good value.
Yeah. And folks, that we're not trying to impress you with money stuff. I drive a 1988 Nissan Sentra. So if you want to come and take a ride in my seriously expensive Nissan Sentra,
I can feel free. I can beat that. I own a 1965 Mustang.
Okay. That's a little different. I'm just saying.
That's right. Although I don't know, mine was $20,000. That's all.
Yeah, exactly.
My wife's car more expensive, but yeah. And I do miss backup cameras, but I don't know. It runs just fine, and it frees up cash flow. Okay, so look, there are people like that. I promise you guys that they don't have a lot of cash. They're spending beyond what they should, and they're not saving. And I'm telling you guys, if you're one of those, that house you don't need, but that impresses other people, and the car that you don't need, but looks good, will feel like anchors around your neck in a rising tide, and may already feel that way now. Now look, guys, if money is a problem in your household when you're out looking for a new job in a tough market, and the market's going to be tough for the next 9 months, maybe even longer, that uncertainty, that fear, that doubt are going to affect your job search. You may be forced to take the first offer you get because you have to have the cash flow, and you know it's not your best opportunity. And careers have a habit of when you take a downturn, getting back to where you were takes much longer than you think. Now, it doesn't matter how embarrassed you are about taking a step backwards. Forget about the embarrassment. Think about your family. That said, if you have a year's worth of cash, that problem goes away. In fact, it would blow people away if you tell them, when they hear that you got laid off or lost your job or whatever, and then you say, yeah, I'm going to start a search. I'm going to get it done. And after 6 months, they see you and you're not panicking. You're not taking another. Why aren't you going to? Oh, look, I had a year's worth of cash saved up. That's why I drive that old beater car that I do. But I don't want to have to make a decision right now because what I'm seeing, I don't want.
Yeah.
And you'll have maybe make a different choice in 6 months, but you'll have had enough opportunities. You'll feel good about the choice you make.
All right, dude. We're like at 45 minutes or so. I think now's probably a good time. Now, folks, we'll continue this on tomorrow. We're not going to make you wait another week for the next part of this.
That's a first, right? We've never done that.
Yeah, typically it'd be the following week, but
no, it's not typically. It's typically unique or not opposites. So it's not typically, right? We've never delivered a 2-part cast that was a new cast as opposed to a Hall of Fame cast or something like that in 2 successive days. Never.
That's true. You're right.
Yeah. You know why? Because as the saying goes, may you live an interesting time.
And now is an interesting time.
Yeah, it sure is.
In the Chinese curse kind of way.
Yeah. Hopefully this open kimono viewpoint of Manager Tools was beneficial to you, and will end with yet another long-term licensee shout out. Our thanks and appreciation to Brian Snow, who's been with us for, 15 years, just about. Brian, you and I have corresponded several times over the years, and I just want to say thank you. It's people like you that make what we do possible, and we're thrilled and privileged to be able to do it for you. Thank you, sir. All right. Thanks, partner.
All right. Folks, we'll talk to you again tomorrow. Hang in there.